Hello and a very warm welcome to this edition of Talking Europe. Well, the UK has voted and the result? Confusion. Theresa May, the Conservative Prime Minister, took a gamble and lost her parliamentary majority. May had said she needed a strong backing in the House of Commons to give her the strength to get the best deal for Britain in negotiations about its withdrawal from the EU. So what happens now? Brussels says it's ready to start those talks, but what about Britain? And the clock is ticking. The UK has until March 29, 2019 to strike a deal with the EU 27, or it could leave with nothing, meaning back to World Trade Organization rules and tariffs. In this show, we're going to be talking to Lord Roger Liddell, a former European advisor to Labour Prime Minister Tony Blair. But we begin with an MP from the Conservative Party of Theresa May. Mr. Bob Neill, thank you so much for being with us. Now, you were re-elected in your constituency, so congratulations to you. But overall, many of your Tory colleagues lost. It looks like Theresa May made a serious mistake in calling these unnecessary snap elections, which look to have left the UK in a much weaker position today.
Well, it's nice to be re-elected personally, thank you, but it's obviously a disappointing result for the Conservative Party, and we are going to have to learn lessons from that. But equally, what is clear is that we are in a position to continue in government. The Prime Minister has moved quickly to come to an arrangement with the Democratic Unionist Party. That will enable us to continue and take our programme forward, so our European partners will know who they are negotiating with. I think now we as a parliament and as a country have to understand some of the lessons and be pragmatic in our approach to the Brexit negotiations. Both the Conservatives and the Democratic Unionists accept the outcome of the referendum, but I'm sure we will want to work pragmatically now with our European partners to get still the best possible outcome.
So for you, it is Theresa May that will stay on as Prime Minister, because a lot of other parties are saying, you know, she called these snap elections calling for, you know, a sign of confidence in her. And the fact that she not only didn't gain the landslide she expected, but lost seats, shows that she doesn't have that confidence from the British voters.
Well, it's regrettable always to lose seats, and perhaps a number of reasons for that. And as you'll have seen, the picture across the country varied. Some places the Conservatives lost more seats than others. Others, like Scotland, we actually did very well. But the upshot is that the only arithmetic that can give a stable government is an arrangement between the Conservatives and the Democratic Unionists, and that's what we've moved immediately to do. I think that's the responsible thing. And I think the uncertainty of changing personalities is not what it's about. We have to make sure that there's a stable government to deal with the Brexit matters and also, of course, running the country on a day-to-day and proper basis.
Of course, the Democratic Unionists, the DUP, which the largest party in Northern Ireland, they were very quick to suggest that they'd be willing to work with the Conservative Party, saying that there is indeed a lot in common. However, one area where they have differed, while the DUP did campaign for a Brexit, they want a much softer Brexit than what Theresa May was proposing. So is that going to change the type of Brexit that Theresa May was saying she was pushing for? Will that be realigned?
Well, it's going to be very important that we sit down and work through what is the deliverable kind of Brexit. There are many of us in the Conservative Party who will not be a million miles away from the Democratic Unionist position. And at the end of it, what we want is the closest possible arrangement for trade. And of course, because of the situation in Ireland, the Democratic Unionists recognise it's important to make travel as well as investment and the movement of goods and services as frictionless as possible. And I think there's grounds for us to work together on that.
And in relation to that, how do you think Brussels might react to these results? You know, going into the elections again, Theresa May saying the 27 were ganging up against her.
Well, I think we need to move on to the sort of language where we are now into the negotiations. It's inevitable in the run-up to negotiations where a bit of positioning is done by both sides. But I think it's very clear from what Monsieur Barnier has said this morning, the EU 27 want to know who they're dealing with. We can tell them that now that it's the Conservative-led government with DUP support. Now I think we have to perhaps have less rhetoric and more actual practical discussions.
And indeed, one of the things that were brought up by people was not only just certain parts of the manifesto, but also the fact that Theresa May had to U-turn, if you like, on some of her proposals. You know, that also led people to worry as, you know, how does that stand for a Prime Minister that's going into really, really tough years of negotiations?
Well, I think that, as we've pointed out, that was a particular aspect of the manifesto which a lot of us said to the Prime Minister needed to be clarified, and she did. I think now we're in a different situation. An election campaign, 7 weeks is a pretty short time. We have a much longer period. We've got the 2 years, and we now have to roll up our sleeves. And I say, be pragmatic. And that's what many of us on the Conservative side, together, I'm sure, with our Democratic Unionist colleagues, will want to achieve.
OK, well, Mr Neil, I wish you all the best of luck with those negotiations and months of talks ahead. We'll no doubt touch base between now and 2019. But for now, thanks for your time. Well, before we talk to our next guest, we're going to have a look back at that campaign in the UK, generally surprising results that followed.
When Theresa May was appointed Britain's new Prime Minister last July, she promised to make the Brexit process her priority. And indeed, she did. Article 50 was triggered on March the 29th this year. A few weeks later, on April the 18th, May stepped out of 10 Downing Street and called for a June snap election.
If we do not hold a general election now, their political game playing will continue. And the negotiations with the European Union will reach their most difficult stage in the run-up to the next scheduled election. Division in Westminster will risk our ability to make a success of Brexit.
Her critics called her arrogant. Her supporters said it was a gutsy move to capitalise on her popularity and boost her bargaining power with the EU. As election results emerge, it's clear that May's gamble has backfired. Her party has lost its parliamentary majority, and even some Conservative MPs admit they're facing an internal crisis.
This is a very bad moment for the Conservative Party, and we need to take stock, and our leader needs to take stock as well.
The result caps a chaotic campaign for Theresa May. She faced criticism from within her own party over a social care proposal, the so-called dementia tax, that called for the elderly to pay for their own health care if their assets are worth more than £100,000. She was also mocked by other candidates for boycotting the campaign debates. She failed to drum up support with young voters, much to the advantage of her rival Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn. May was also accused of being aloof, preferring privately booked halls to give speeches rather than spontaneous interactions on the streets. It was a campaign overshadowed by terrorism. In the last 3 weeks of campaigning, 2 terrorist attacks struck Manchester and London, forcing candidates to suspend campaigning twice.
Well, with us now to give us his view on those campaign strategies and notably the results from that general election is Lord Roger Liddell, former European advisor to Labour Prime Minister Tony Blair and still a member of the EU Select Committee in the House of Lords. Roger Liddell, thanks so much for your time. The results are in.
Thank you.
It's a nation divided. Are you surprised? Are you worried?
Well, I have mixed feelings, to be quite honest. I've never been a great fan of Jeremy Corbyn and his brand of left-wing politics, but I have to say I have a certain admiration for what he's managed to achieve. I think that it's a very good result for Labour. At the start of the election campaign, Labour was on 26% in the opinion polls, and we got over 40% of the vote yesterday. And it's a very good result. Secondly, I think it shows that there is an appetite, a new appetite in the British public for a break with austerity and for a greater concern for equality and social justice and redistribution. And these are things that haven't been prominent publicly on the British agenda for 3 decades, really since the arrival of Mrs. Thatcher in the early 80s. So it's possible it may signal a turning point in British politics.
Do you think then that this election was more about those national issues, notably the economy and austerity and social issues, rather than what we all abroad thought it would be about, which was about, once again, this EU question? I have to say, Labour and Tory both said that they would, stay in line with the Brexit and the UK would be leaving the EU. But is that of concern to the British as much? Is that what played into this election at all?
I think there's some evidence that actually Labour did very well in areas which had voted strongly to remain in the EU. If I can quote you said one simple example, on a terrific swing, we won the London seat of Battersea last night, and in the referendum, Battersea had voted something like 75% in favour of staying in the EU. And I think the two were not unrelated. I think that the Conservatives made an error I think Mrs May has jumped on the Brexit bandwagon too firmly, and she's ignored the concerns of the people who voted to stay in Europe last June.
Do you think, because indeed the main difference between the Labour and the Tory parties was hard Brexit or a slightly softer Brexit, do you think hard Brexit, which was one championed by Theresa May, leaving the single market, leaving the custom unions, walking away entirely, is that now going to change? Is that off the table in a way?
I wouldn't say it was off the table. What it seems to me is that there are more possibilities of achieving a better Brexit than it appeared there would be yesterday. So I think that is a significant change. What I think is clear is that there is no majority in the new House of Commons for a hard Brexit. There is no majority because there is sufficient number of Conservative MPs who I think have very serious reservations about the policies that the approach to Brexit that Mrs May has put forward. So I think that if we're going to get a better Brexit, there has to be much more an attempt to arrive at a cross-party consensus on Brexit, which would mean a softer Brexit, which would mean, in my view, staying in the single market and the customs union, accepting that this involves obligations in terms of the jurisdiction of the Court of Justice and free movement of people, but putting us in a position where we would remain close to the European Union, and maybe another day in 10 years' time, we might reconsider our decision to leave the political institutions of the Union.
But indeed, you mentioned there divisions within Parliament. Where does that leave the UK when it tries to go and negotiate its Brexit deal? You have a divided UK Parliament and, for now at least, a united 27 member states on the other side.
Yes, well, I don't think it's an easy situation. I would argue that the way forward is for Mrs May to reach out to Labour and the SNP and the Liberal Democrats and try and agree a common approach, which she has so far failed to do. The truth is about the Conservative approach on Brexit is that they are trying to get all the benefits of being in the single market without meeting any of the obligations. They're not prepared at the moment to accept that there are trade-offs between market access, which is absolutely crucial to jobs and prosperity, and acceptance of EU rules and jurisdiction. The government has got to recognise the existence of that trade-off if we're going to get a sensible deal with our European partners.
Indeed, you mentioned there the economy, and also on Thursday we were having figures come out saying that the growth in the UK is forecast at the lowest across the European Union. Is there a scenario? A lot of people say, financial disaster with the Brexit. How do you see it? I mean, surely the UK, it's a very strong economy. No matter what deal it has, it will remain resilient.
Well, I think the UK is a strong economy, but I think the question is have we diminished our growth potential as a result of voting to leave the EU? And I would say we have. I think this is particularly important actually not so much in the trade in goods, where I think it might be easy to negotiate a tariff-free arrangement with the rest of Europe, but in services, which is a really strong British competitive strength, and where we benefit enormously from being in the single market and from the principles of free movement and right to establish in any European country. And I think that is going to have a very, very bad effect on our economy if we're no longer able to do that.
Finally, we have that deadline kind of looming of 2019 when, the UK needs to have made a deal with the EU, or it could possibly be forced to leave with nothing. How confident are you that the general elections that took place on Thursday are the last general elections that we'll see before that deadline in 2019?
I'm not at all confident about that. I think that there is a prospect that the pressure from the anti-Europeans in the Conservative Party will be to put pressure on Mrs. May to say, walk away from these talks in the autumn of this year, refuse to pay a penny to the European budget, which the Commission is demanding 100 billion euros. Refuse to pay a penny, walk away, and let's just have a break. Complete break with the European Union, and then try and go to the country again in another general election on that platform. I think that would be a disaster, an economic and political disaster for Britain.
Roger Little, it sounds like we will be keeping in touch over the next couple of years as we see how those talks develop between the UK and the EU. But for now, thanks indeed for having joined us on Talking Europe. That brings us to the end of this edition. Do take care and see you again next time.